Security of the data, competence of the clients, agility, technological reality. It is difficult to apprehend this. The task is complex for the companies who want to take advantage of the cloud while protecting their data and adopting a trusted cloud. Our ambition during this half hour is to see what are the decision leverages, talking with Henri Chabrier, who works with PWC, the legal expert, Valérie Hommage, who's also working with PWC in charge of legal aspects, and the cybersecurity expert that I will bring as an associate with PWC. Before Valérie will talk about the problematics, first thought, the totally sovereign cloud does not exist and will not in the future for the general public. So that's something we wanted to say, and we will explain how it is underlined. This sovereignty is heard as a total master of your CIS, and the absence of dependence will not be complete while designers will be provided by companies that come from out of Europe. The notion of sovereignty is difficult to apply in the current concept, and the current question is that of the level of confidence that we will make to states or third parties that will be involved in the cloud chain that will have the possibility to access the company data. It involves a level of control that has to be defined, with which implies constraints and overcosts. So in these exchanges, we will have to ask ourselves what is the position we want to have there according to what we are asked to protect, legally speaking, what we want to protect as a company, but also according to the competitive leverage that we want to use to take full advantage of the cloud. So it is necessary for most of the players to use a hybrid solution and multi-cloud to reconcile all the constraints. So these architectures have their own risks, which will require to anticipate, but it's also an opportunity to automate the approach. To begin this exchange, Valérie, maybe you could provide us with your vision on these notions of sovereign cloud. The notions of sovereign cloud and trusted cloud are often mixed up. And it's quite logical when these two notions have the same ambition, i.e., not only to offer a cloud which is very secure from a technical point of view, but also a cloud that helps you protect from extraterritorial threats. The difference between these two notions is that the sovereign cloud is the ancestor of the trusted cloud. The sovereign cloud was born under in 2016 in a note that he wrote to the territorial communities with the idea to have them moved to French clouds, i.e. operated by French operators and on the French territory. After this ambition, well, actually it was a failure because the market was not able to offer this type of solution to the local authorities. The state realized it, the government realized it, and between the will to make something French and the possibility to do it on the market actually was not possible. So he reviewed his project and he imagined a more flexible notion, which is that of the trusted cloud. It's a very secure cloud based on ANSI Second Cloud, which embarks a part that helps you protect against extraterritorial threats, suggesting a possibility to certify the European companies that will operate data exclusively in Europe, and helping them to embark other companies with certified offers, but with technical securities and organizing a silo information system. So Secnum Cloud was updated in 2022, and it applies when you talk about trusted cloud today. And what should be a trusted cloud? Well, it should be it will expand, but the trusted cloud is compulsory for state services when they deal with sensitive data. It's not only RGPD, but any sensitive data, and on treatment for essential aspects of the state. For the private sector, it involves platforms of partner dematerialization companies, which we have to use in the framework of e-invoicing. These providers, if they want to use cloud services providers, they have to do it with certified providers. You talked about the extraterritorial effect of extraterritorial companies. You have to bear in mind that all the regulations in any country in the world have at their disposal regulations that have an effect on out of their territory, which means consequences of national laws that apply to other people, which obliges these national people to access data that are dealt with by these people. Not only the United States have these type of texts, China also have, we also have in Europe, but it was stressed, the USA were stressed because our data are essentially processed by Silicon Valley. And so the stress was put on the US regulations, which are incredibly numerous in the field. So what we know the most is Patriot Act, FCPA, that dates back from 1978. It's a legislation that was taken after the Watergate that helps when you suspect corruption from a foreign citizen. Then you have the Patriot Act that deals with terrorism, the Cloud Act that helps the judiciary in the US to impose access to data processed by American companies. You have FISA 702, which gives the possibility to the agencies such as the FBI to access a certain number of data. So today it's the threat for our data that a threat for the providers to be constrained to provide these data, because otherwise they would have important fines in billions of dollars. We understand that the US were drivers on this dimension, but where are we in Europe? Well, the answer that was made by Europe was RGPD, that imposes on the subcontractors and providers to put in place a certain number of measures when they transfer data out of the EU to inadequate countries, i.e. countries who have no internal legislation to protect data, in which case RGPD foresees that legal tools have to be used, two tools today, i.e. or contractual organizations that were validated by the European Commission and that impose security measures to people who import or export. There is a banking contractual and the privacy shield. That was a tool that was specifically negotiated between Europe and the United States to help American companies that accepted to self-certify to be able to receive data from Europe, because we considered that in these companies there were confidentiality spheres, and consequently when you transfer data to such companies, you are compliant. But this has changed in 2020 with a decree called Schrems II. You have probably heard about it. It's the name of the initiator, Max Schrems, who is an activist who defends RGPD. It was not the first time that he intervened, because before that he had already managed to have another decree suppressed 4 years before. So Schrems said that it was not possible to use the privacy shield because the tool was not secure enough, because on the one hand it's a self-certification which is ill-controlled or monitored, so in reality practices were not enough audited, and also because he considered that when an entity is from the US, it could have state pressure with financial pressures. So even if you send data over there, the company could leave the state access its data. So from one day to the other, it was not possible to use privacy shields. And they even went further, because they considered that the two other tools were still valid, but with a double condition, that it should add two conditions. First, before considering the possibility of a transfer, the companies have to assess the legislation of the host country, and in the hypothesis that there is a risk, they should put in place technical and operational measures to limit the risk. So these technical and organizational measures are: one, limit the process, so transfer less data, then encryption them, then ask the provider or the other company that hosts the data to tell if someone is asking for the data. In some cases, you cannot transfer because it is considered that data are considered too sensitive. In this context, we often hear about the ADEM. You were talking about Secnum Cloud. How these labels take into account these notions of extraterritoriality. The solution that was found for Secnum Cloud is a maximum one. Well, to be able to benefit from the label, the company that uses providers out of the EU have to prove that they have no access to the data. technically speaking, they couldn't do anything. So it's a work in silo. Henri, how does it happen in terms of implementation? How the trusted cloud is integrated concretely in the technological ecosystem of companies? Thank you, Jabal. First and foremost, before entering into the technology of the Secnum Cloud, you have to remember that what you are looking for in a cloud, with a cloud. Well, you want to scale up very quickly. It's the ASO service, particularly temporarily, but generally speaking too, to have a lot of flexibility. So that's one first element. Then to do what? Well, for innovation to serve your business. If you have a tight budget, that's one of the balance point that will lead you to decide to use multiple clouds. You may have your own data centers, but or public clouds, but you will have to distribute all these functions. If you have a look at this equation and what is available, there are certified clouds, the list is evolving. So there are many infrastructure bricks that are available. And there are also services such as video teleconference, and it's getting richer and richer every year. And everything which is related to innovation and this possibility to scale up. So you can rely on the promise of the cloud. You can see many co-companies being created, French companies with US technology. Several initiatives are undergoing that are being certified. It's a very exciting period because it's a totally new system with the French players, and this issue is not only French. In all the states there are similar approaches, and opportunities are interesting for all French companies under the framework of partnerships. Embedded technology is also involved there. So we have to take it globally, even if the trusted cloud is focused on France. So how does it work? We know that we will be in a multi-cloud situation. You have to work from the data, which is at the heart of the regulation, knowing that this regulation is evolving, being able to divide it, to distribute it in different clouds. So that's an issue of a microservice architecture. So technology is here to do it, but the starting point may be quite complex if it's monolithic. There can be a technical debt there. You only you optimize financially things. You have more flexibility, but you may not be able to have all the necessary flexibility to have things executed what you want according to the data. So you need skills, but it's also strategic because you need people inside your company and providers. We as providers are very motivated, but it is important that it be done internally. Internally, people have to master the architecture. We realize And we talk about YAS and PaaS layers, but there is also the SaaS layer, because for innovation there are many softwares that exist, but we realize that we will need to be able to automate all the operations. It's not only infra as a code, but operation as a code. You will have to be able to deploy, but also financially manage from the cloud, and the costs increase when you go on the cloud, of course. You can also free it positively for companies, generally speaking, and obviously it will have an impact on consumption. So you have to be able to simplify things. The same goes for technical supervision and the control of data. It's important to have a trusted cloud, but if you do not know where the data go, well, it's a problem. You have to be. We need policy to manage these data, and obviously you have to be able to manage cybersecurity in this multi-cloud space with all these specific issues. Actually, you began to explain what we just saw with Henry, is that all these challenges are linked to cybersecurity. What we can put forward is the fact that the multi-cloud induces more complexity, because it requires to master all the layers that underlie it. It is true that it makes us go from a paradigm where in the former world you only had one provider, and today it's several different philosophies of securities. So that's a challenge, as you mentioned. From a cybersecurity point of view, with PWC we have a watch service which helps us know that complexity leads to vulnerabilities related to errors in the architecture. But today it represents a threat and a risk for data, so you have to anticipate these cybersecurity challenges as from the beginning of the multi-cloud. But there are two opportunities. First, automation. It can bring efficiency from infrastructure management point of view, but also from the cybersecurity point of view, because it will help secure the configurations. Second opportunity we can see is the control side. The cloud brings possibilities to have a automated monitoring, and remediation can be also automated. What we observe today is that it is not very much used. This supposes that you invest in the cloud transformation, which is not always the case today. So reflecting on the cyber approach, topics around the access management, data protection, generally speaking, around detection management. Some companies have their own detection methods, but the use of the cloud requires to rethink this. You talked about as cloud. It's an opportunity. It helps us steer all these cloud in a unified and centralized manner. But today we have to rethink the security paradigms on which we relied before, particularly everything which is at the heart of a system. In companies that work widely with Microsoft, we thought about the Active Directory. That's something that came up very often in the debates. Today, the S-code infrastructure are a new heart of trust that will have to be secured. And this involves new risks, because you cannot imagine that the compromission of an environment, a development environment, will not have a major impact on the SI with this new paradigm. What we recommend is clearly to avoid to mix instances and users, and on the other hand, developments that are naturally sensitive. We mentioned the risks related to the data access by the cloud provider. Today it is considered that the risks related to the supply chain, which is all the ecosystem of the players who intervene in this cloud chain, it represents a risk that is generally underestimated, particularly when we talk about cloud transformation for on-premise clouds. Most companies have created access infrastructures to separate things and master the different accesses. Today with the cloud, particularly public clouds, you can access these infrastructures from the internet, so you have to rethink that and have it evolved. All these illustrations demonstrate that there are some issues you have to bear in mind. The integration of cyber security as soon as possible when you move to cloud to address the complexity you mentioned, Henry, the diverse philosophies that you may observe. So you have to take ownership of them. And then mastering the risks that are related to the providers. What do we have to set up? I think there is the dimension of mastering the legal environment, which is complex. Second, you mentioned it, Henry, we may have a special attention on the definition of the policies and the referential architectures, particularly in the framework of multi-cloud context. Some referentials do exist, but they are very heterogeneous. I think about the Cloud Security Alliance cloud, for instance. They tackle a certain number of issues, and the idea is to take ownership of these approaches and then take ownership of the technical solutions. You may add them. So the idea is to define where you want to put the balance and try and mitigate the risks. There are many solutions. Confidential computing for accesses. So to conclude, what we can say is that trusted cloud is an issue of managing risk. We have to define the right means related to the threats against which you want to protect yourself. Today, companies have, many of them at least, decided to accelerate the transformation. But what are the means to put forward? And what we can say is that a lack of maturity and technological complexity are barriers to the acceleration of the use. So that's what we wanted to share with you today. To close, maybe we can have a conversation on our stand where we can go further on this discussion. Our stand is FIC. Thank you very much. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Valerie.